Many thanks for joining us, dear viewers. This is our weekly program, Diplomacy, and I will come on the moon by hosting and producing this program for you. Have a wonderful time with our program. Today I'm joined by Swedish Ambassador to Ethiopia, Henric. Many thanks for joining me, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
Well, just to begin with, how can you express the historical relationship between Ethiopia and that of Swedish?
How many hours do we have for that? No, we have a very long-standing relations between Sweden and Ethiopia, and we actually opened an embassy here in 1946. This is actually the first premises of the Swedish embassy in Ethiopia. So I would say when I meet Ethiopian people here in Addis, they approach me saying that I went to one of the Swedish schools. And I think we have contributed to around 6,000 schools in Ethiopia. So the history goes long back, and also many Ethiopians living in Sweden and many Swedes living in Ethiopia. So there's a close people-to-people contact also between our countries.
So how can we express the current bilateral status between both countries?
Well, I think we have to build on the history between Sweden and Ethiopia. We started with a bilateral development cooperation in 1957, actually. And Ethiopia was the first partner country for development assistance in the world. And this has, of course, continued. But I would say that now there are, of course, also many other contacts in terms of investments, interest from Swedish companies doing investments in Ethiopia. So the relations have been built from development cooperation to more investments, but we still have substantial development assistance to Ethiopia today.
Well, what is exactly the real cooperation between both countries?
Well, in terms of our development cooperation, we have a 5-year strategy. We're actually going to revise that strategy during this year. We focus on building democracy, human rights, working with job creation, and sustainable environment, climate change and energy. So the areas are very broad, and especially when it comes to job creation, it's also important to add on the interest of Swedish companies doing business in Ethiopia today. And there are many big international Swedish companies present, but I also think that we should also look into the more small and medium-sized enterprises that has links between both Sweden and Ethiopia today. Not at least working with entrepreneurship, innovations. I think it's important in this digital society that we are in right now. So the relations are very broad. We just had a meeting today involving medical companies in Sweden and also the Ministry of Health here in Ethiopia to look into different sectors where we can work together in terms of technology exchange. So it will be important both for Sweden and Ethiopia working together in the health sector, for instance.
Well, how can you express the political and trade relationship between both countries? Political and trade relationship specifically.
Well, for us, Ethiopia is a very important country in the region. We have the African Union in Addis Ababa. I'm also accredited to the African Union. Therefore, Ethiopia is a very important country for stability, not at least in the region, but also contributing to other parts of Africa. So that's why I think that we both have bilateral perspective working in Ethiopia, but also a regional cooperation and perspective.
Well, in what ways the Swedish embassy in Ethiopia are now engaged in community service engagements in Ethiopia, and problem-solving engagements?
In terms of community development, as I mentioned in the beginning, Sweden has also contributed a lot to building education and schools in Ethiopia. But now we are working, of course, much broader with social assistance, working with UN agencies in Ethiopia, but also developing civil society in Ethiopia. And I think that's critical for a country to have a strong and vibrant civil society, and openness to freely express ideas, how a country should be developed.
Well, how can you explain the tourist destination and investment opportunities here in Ethiopia?
Tourists, I think Ethiopia is a hub for many tourists, but I have been here since September 2020, last year. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to travel that much in the country. But I think that in terms of tourism and culture, Ethiopia has a lot to give to also Swedish tourists visiting Ethiopia. And I think the culture exchange and cooperation in the culture field is also very interesting in terms of music, film, arts, etc. So that's also an important sector that we can also have a lot of a change between our two countries.
The Swedish embassy in Ethiopia is strictly working on gender equality. What should be done in ensuring gender equality in empowering women, children, and youth?
Well, I would say that first of all, I represent what we call a feminist foreign policy. And that's something that has been in our Swedish DNA, I would say, for a very long time to provide the same opportunities for women and men and girls and boys. That's something that I think every society has to gain, using both the 100% of the population. And we are working a lot to improve both women's empowerment. We're also working with sexual and reproductive health and rights in Ethiopia today, and to try to reach out also to civil society, to media, to address the importance of gender equality in all societies. And this is something that we are still working a lot in Sweden at home. It can be same salaries for both men and women. We have come quite far in Sweden on that, but still there are differences between women and men when it comes to salaries, and I think that's a very important thing to address also in a country like Ethiopia, but also to work with men to change men's attitudes and also to work with gender equality in a society. So both men and women have a responsibility for an equal society.
So first of all, why should the first feminist foreign policies mandatory?
What we usually say with a feminist foreign policy, we are working with first a rights perspective, equal rights for both women and men, but then it also comes to resources, that we also have to provide equal resources for men and women. And also representation. And I think that the latest development in Ethiopia is quite positive when it comes to representation. But I think that's important at all levels in the society, both at the political level, in civil society, but also in the business sector. And for instance, in Sweden, I think we have still a challenge when it comes to the business sector, because usually you find mostly men in the boardrooms in the business sector. So we have to work on all levels in the society to address gender equality.
Well, what would be your main plans during your tenure here in Ethiopia?
Well, I mean, first of all, to continue to deepen the relationship we have between our two countries, and for us, it will also be important to support the different reform initiatives in Ethiopia, so that Ethiopia can continue in terms of political reform and democratic reform. We are providing a lot of support to the media sector, and in the importance to have a free media and freedom of expression. So I think that Ethiopia should continue that way, to reform in a democratic reforms, and I think that we have a lot to contribute to that, but also in terms of investments to make sure that we also can contribute to economic development in Ethiopia. Well, I also want to, I think it's important as an ambassador not to stay in the capital. You need to travel in different regions. So that's what I want to do, to make sure that I try to visit as many places as possible, including of course Oromia region in Ethiopia.
How can you define the role or share of the Swedish investors or companies here in Ethiopia?
Well, there are different sectors, of course, that have an interest, for instance, in the garment industry, but also in telecom sector. We have great companies from Sweden involved in the telecom sector globally. But also, as I mentioned in the beginning, the health sector is now also a priority for us. And that's why I think also that both our countries have something to gain, to share experiences in different sector. The transport sector is also a very important area, and we have companies like well-known companies like Volvo and Scania that are not only providing trucks or buses, but also whole transport system. And I think that's an area that have already started in Ethiopia, and there is a great potential to develop that further, to have a more sustainable, efficient, environmentally safe transport sector in Ethiopia.
In this year, Ethiopia is planning to undertake a general election. In what ways your country is planning to support Ethiopia?
First of all, Sweden is, of course, part of the European Union, so we work under the European Union umbrella in terms of our political dialogue with Ethiopia. I believe that elections will be very important, very critical, and to also to contribute to dialogue, a political dialogue on the future of Ethiopia. And Sweden is providing support to the preparation of the election, quite substantial support to the election board, to make sure that the election is prepared in the best way. So that's how we can support. But also in terms of the role of media, it's also important before and during and after election. We're also providing support to civil society as important actors in terms of observing the elections, for instance, but also working with civic education, so people also understand how they can be part and take part in the election, because Ethiopia is a huge country, and of course the whole population has to be part of an election.
What kind of strategies is underway by the Swedish government in accessing COVID-19 vaccine for all?
That's a very important question, and I think first of all I have to commend also the African Union, how the COVID response in Africa as a whole, at the whole continent. But of course now the most important issue is to make sure that we have efficient and equal distribution of vaccine. So I think this is on the agenda, both in Sweden, in the European Union, but also in African Union. I think COVID response and vaccine was part of the summit last week, and I think that Sweden would like to contribute to that. Vaccine is actually distributed equally globally.
Well, how can you express your embassy's works and result in the last year, especially in Initiative Africa, and especially works underway in ensuring gender equality?
Well, I can't really assess the whole year, because I arrived in Ethiopia in September last year. But this is really high on our agenda, and we're also trying to reach out to different parts of society. We have a gender network where we try to gather representatives, both men and women, from different sectors, to discuss the way forward in different areas of the society. It could be on education, it could be on how gender equality is important in building peace in a society, and the importance to have women in the peace process that we have seen globally been missing a lot in many peace processes. That women have not been actually at the table in discussions regarding dialogue and mediation and peace-building initiatives. And not at least also, as I mentioned before, media, women's role in media, women's role in politics. So we have to work with the whole society. We have to work with governments, with the private sector and civil society to actually make sure that we can get the more gender equal world. I think everyone can win on that.
Well, coming to the recent situation of Ethiopia, especially in the operation took place in the Tigray regional state, what is exactly your country's understanding about the operation, and in what ways your country is supporting Tigray region in reconstructing the region as well as in accessing humanitarian assistance? Well,
I think again, Sweden is part of the European Union, and actually this week we have a special envoy from the European Union, the Finnish foreign minister Haavisto here. So we are part of the European Union's efforts in terms of having dialogue with the government, with the United Nations, working in Ethiopia, and especially on humanitarian situation. We are concerned about the humanitarian situation in northern part of Ethiopia. Sweden has also been co-chairing one of the donor groups on humanitarian assistance and have taken initiatives for dialogue with different government entities, state entities, to especially now, I think, to make sure that humanitarian access is provided in northern part of Ethiopia. That's critical at the moment. So that's the first priority, to make sure that humanitarian organizations have access and can support the whole region with humanitarian assistance, both in terms of health, nutrition, and food, for instance, and logistics. So that's a priority. But when it comes to reconstruction, this is something that we have to continue the dialogue and to see what kind of support is needed. And also I think it's important to have also a dialogue on the situation in the region, in the northern part of Ethiopia. But first priority, I think, is the humanitarian situation right now, and then we will come back to reconstruction.
Well, as a general, for the future, what kind of activities should be done or should be undertaken in strengthening this historic relationship between your country, Sweden and Ethiopia?
Well, from a Swedish perspective, of course, we had a non-permanent seat in the Security Council a few years ago, and especially we worked with Ethiopia in the Security Council, in the UN Security Council. That has also been important in our work with the African Union, for instance. But working with African Union, we're also part of the European Union, as I mentioned, and this coming year we have important processes ongoing. The European Union, African Union partnership, and hopefully we will see both a ministerial meeting between our two continents and also a summit where we will discuss how we can deepen the partnership between European Union and Africa, and that's high on our agenda, and to work with not when it comes to COVID situation, also to what we say build back in a sustainable way, because many countries in Africa and Europe have been hit very hard by COVID-19 in terms of health, of course, social consequences, but also economic consequences. And I think we need to work together to build back better in a more sustainable way than before. And I think that now we have the potential to actually look back and to see how we would like to shape our societies in a more sustainable way, considering both socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable societies. So this is a priority for Sweden and the European Union right now, to build this mutual partnership with Africa.
Ambassador, I'm almost done with my questions. If you have a general message for the people and government of Ethiopia, here you can.
Well, I'm happy to be here in Ethiopia, and I will do my best to be a good ambassador for all Ethiopians and for all Swedes, because I think that the importance is to have dialogue and discussions, and based on that, I think we can move forward to even strengthen our relationship between our two countries. So I would like to be open for that and have more discussions in different fields, because there are so many things that should be discussed, and that's why I'm here as an ambassador of Sweden in Ethiopia. So I'm open for all discussions. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador, I really appreciate your stay and your kindness to have such a beautiful interview. Thank you very much for joining me.
Most welcome. Thank you.
Dear viewers, this will bring us to the end of this edition. I'm Lundquist, hosting and producing this program for you. Till the next edition, have a wonderful time.